Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
We'll now go into colonial administration. Colonialism is defined as an imposition of a more developed culture over a less developed one, backed up by expansionist and economic adventurism. European capitalist countries established political, economic, military and cultural hegemony over other parts of the world, which was initially at a lower level and therefore could not resist domination. It could also be made known to you to understand that we had 4 main countries of the world that colonized other countries. We have the British, we have the Spanish, we have the French, and the Portuguese. These were the 4 powerful nations of the world which colonized all other nations: Britain, France, Portugal, and Spain. Before the 1880s, Europe had gone ahead of the rest of the world in science and technology. So Europe of 19th century became the workshop of the world, with growing desire for raw materials for their industries. Britain, Belgium, France, Germany, Italy were all involved in this race. So the competitive search for markets and sources of raw material that was growing in Europe only affected European attitudes to Africa. By the late 19th century, the concern about sourcing materials and markets had become a serious issue in most European countries. The scramble for Africa by these European countries led to the partition of Africa after the Berlin Conference of 1884 through 1885. Britain colonized Nigeria, Ghana, the Gambia, and Sierra Leone in West Africa. So as from 1898, the British government sought to establish and maintain a colonial state in Nigeria. To achieve this, a number of measures were to be taken. For example, removal of all visible opposition to the imposition of colonial rule, expansion and consolidation of British authority over the territory later known as Nigeria. Similarly, to gradually amalgamate the 3 different units of administration: the Lagos Colony, the Southern Protectorate, the Northern Protectorate. In May 1906, Lagos Colony and Southern Protectorates were joined together and had a different name: the Colony and Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. In the same vein, Lord Lugard in 1914 amalgamated Lagos Colony and Southern Protectorate with Northern Protectorate to form a single colony called the Protectorate of Nigeria. Britain therefore governed Nigeria by means of a system popularly referred to as indirect rule. Indirect rule is a system of administration in which the British colonial government adopted as its colonial policy in dealing with the people by using the traditional rulers, the traditional political institutions, administrative, cultural and judicial structures, as intermediaries, while the British officials mainly advised and where necessary enforce colonial regulations. The main features of indirect rule includes the following. The colonialists ruled indirectly by engaging the traditional rulers and the chiefs to govern the people. Number 2, the traditional political system of government in place was utilized. Number 3, the customs and tradition of the people played a significant role in the administration. Number 4, the cultural values of the people were respected by the British officials. Number 5, the British officials were to guide and, where need be, enforce colonial regulation, for instance, residents and district officers. Number 6, traditional rulers were respected and given exalted positions in the administration, which made it easy for the colonialists to operate and rule. Number 7, the cost of admission was not high because those involved were paid peanuts. These and others are the main features of indirect rule, as was the case in Nigeria. Reasons for the adoption of the system of indirect rule. Number 1, the system had few Europeans to control effectively areas under their control. That is to say, that they lacked British personnel. This was why they adopted the indirect rule system. Number 2, there was no sufficient fund for the British government to engage its officials for direct administration. Number 3, poor climatic condition also worsened the situation. Many British citizens refused coming down to be involved in the admission due to poor climate and the presence of mosquitoes. Thus, Africa was nicknamed the white man grave, in quotes, as a result of these factors. Number 4, the colonialists wanted to create markets for their goods and to encourage West Africans to produce those raw materials, which means that one of the reasons for adopting indirect rule system was for them to satisfy their economic needs. Number 5, the use of traditional rulers and their institutions made it possible for the system to thrive, because Britain saw that there was no need destroying the institutions in place, and that bringing a different system altogether might not produce any desired result. Number 6, Lord Lugard felt that the source of this policy in India, Uganda, etc. was enough proof that the system would succeed in any of the British colonies. This also prompted the reason for adopting indirect rule system in Nigeria. Number 7, obedience to constitutional authority is a must for a stable political system. The subjects in northern Nigeria were so obedient to their rulers and institutions, and the result was stability in the system. Britain therefore had to allow the system to stay. Any interference would have incurred the wrath of the people. These are some of the reasons for the adoption of indirect rule system in Nigeria. We'll now go over to the next point, which is reasons why British government involved African traditional rulers in the colonial leadership of West Africa. 1. There were few of them who were ready to serve in the colonies. Therefore, lack of personnel made the colonialists to rely on the chiefs. Number 2, the British encounter with the chiefs during the period of occupation proved to them that the chiefs were powerful and were highly respected by their people. Thus, the status of these traditional rulers also prompted the British government to involve African traditional rulers in the leadership of West Africa during the colonial era. Number 3, it was very convenient for the British government to use the chief since they were being paid peanuts as salaries. Number 4, local chiefs had been successfully used in the colonial leadership in other colonies. Thus, they had past experience. Number 5, as the custodian of the people's culture, the traditional rulers were found useful in the maintenance of law and order in the colonies. Number 6, traditional rulers were found useful in the collection of taxes and rates. Number 7, the British felt that the presence of local chiefs in the leadership would bring about political stability. These are the reasons why the British government involved African traditional rulers in the colonial leadership of West Africa. Having seen that, we will look into the factors that led to the success of indirect rule in northern Nigeria. 1. Britain acknowledged the need to preserve the indigenous culture and institutions by assisting them to adapt to modern government. Number 2, the traditional system of leadership in northern Nigeria was highly centralized. Most of the emirs were authoritarian. Nobody dare question their authority. There were no check in the system, but it was stable, and so Britain accepted it. Education makes one to know his rights and seek redress when such rights are violated. So most of the people in the north were illiterates, and so they could not question or challenge the imposition or presence of foreign culture. That was the third factor that led to the success of indirect rule in northern Nigeria. Number 4, adherents to Islamic religion believe that their rulers are divinely sent, and so respect and obedience are necessary for a true believer. This helped in propagating the tenets of indirect rule. Number 5, before the advent of colonial authorities, the native leadership had a defined and reliable method of tax collection. What Britain did was only to overhaul the system for effective performance. Taxation was a necessary tool in the administration. Number 6, indirect rule provided an opportunity for training local leaders in methods, ways, and means of local administration. Number 7, there existed already in the northern Nigeria a tradition of total obedience to authorities that are constituted. This made it easy for the colonialists to govern the people. These are the reasons or the factors that led to the success of indirect rule in northern Nigeria. What are the reasons why the educated elites opposed the introduction of indirect rule in southern Nigeria? Is the next thing we are going to discuss. Reasons why the educated elites opposed the introduction of indirect rule in southern Nigeria. Number one, the indirect rule system made use of local chiefs and traditional rulers who were mostly uneducated. Number two, British officials did not see the need to include the educated Nigerians in the colonial administration. Number three, the creation of warrant chiefs in the eastern part of the country brought about problems of different proportions. The warrant chiefs became high-handed and ruthless in the discharge of their functions. Number four, the colonial officials strengthened and protected the powers of the chiefs even beyond traditional bonds. In fact, they acted more than the traditional rule. Number five, Britain imposed different methods of taxation on the people, and it caused riots in different parts of the country. For example, the Aba Women's Riot of 1929 and other similar riots in Yoruba land were as a result of taxation which was imposed on the people negatively. Number six, the position of chieftaincy institution was disrespected by giving them menial job to perform. Number seven, the level of education was high in the East, as people could question the relevance of indirect rule system imposed on them. Most of the protests or crises that erupted were as a result of this. These are some of the reasons why the elites of the southern Nigeria opposed indirect rule. The next discourse will be on reasons for the partial success of indirect rule system in western Nigeria. Number one, the issue of the people not being fully submissive emanate from the fact that people could question realistically actions of their rulers, and we are not ready to accommodate a dictator. This was in contrast to what was obtained in the north. Thus, subjects were not fully submissive. Number two, Christianity was the dominant religion in the West. It is more democratic than the Islamic religion. People detest authoritarianism. Number three, the education acquired by most people made them detest colonial rule. They did not see the importance of a foreign rule imposing itself on the traditional political system, which was acceptable to the people before the advent of the colonialists. Number four, most of the obas were constitutional obas and not absolute, so their powers were limited by various factors in the system. Number five, the system was decentralized and not centralized, hence the partial success. Number six, in the West, before indirect rule, there was a system of collecting tax which was acceptable to the people. A new system was imposed on the people by the colonial authority, which was unacceptable and resulted to protests in some parts of the region. Number 7, they were not recognized and made use of in the leadership, and so they had nothing to do with the system of leadership imposed on the people. So these are some of the reasons for the partial success of indirect rule system in Western Nigeria. We will now look into the warrant chiefs. What were the role they played in the colonial system of government in Nigeria? The warrant chiefs. In eastern Nigeria, traditional rulers or paramount traditional rulers cannot be easily identified. A bishop institution, for instance, was not clearly defined, and so the colonial authority decided to select some people whom they made chiefs and given certificates of recognition in quotes, which were called warrants. This was why they are popularly referred to as warrant chiefs. They were constituted into an all-purpose body, which was at once a court as well as an executive and law-making body for the area under the warrant chief's jurisdiction. This body was known as native court and can also be referred to as native authority. This action exhibited by the British colonial authority was seen as undemocratic in the setting of Igbo political system. No wonder why these warrant chiefs were ruthless and high-handed in the process of exercising their functions. The method of tax collection introduced and the way it was made manipulate by the warrant chiefs brought fears in the system. The fear of the women that they would be taxed like the men led to the Aba women riot of 1929/1930. Functions of the warrant chiefs. Number 1, they can try cases that are of customary and traditional in nature. Number 2, they can also pass bylaws. Number 3, they also have the power to recruit and supervise workers. Number 4, they were involved in assessing the people's wealth. Number 5, they were also involved in the collection of taxes. These were the functions of the warrant chiefs and the role which they played in Nigeria's colonial administration by the British. Having looked into the indirect rule system of British administration, we will now look into the French colonial administration in West Africa. We have seen how the British governed their colonies, the things they put in place to govern their colonies, the reasons why it thrived in some parts of the country, and the reasons why it did not thrive in some parts of Nigeria, and also even the reason why it partially thrived in some areas of the country. We have come to the French colonial administration in West Africa. It is worthy of note to know also that it was also the scramble for Africa and the search for raw materials that also motivated France to take over its territories in West Africa between late 19th century and early 20th century, and the territories which they took over were Benin Republic, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mauritania. In 1919, the League of Nations gave Togo to France. Togo was administered by France, different from her other colonies in West Africa. This is because Togo was a mandate and under the supervision of the League of Nations. The French administration used what is known as the policy of assimilation. The policy of assimilation was the official colonial policy of the French administration in West Africa. The system involves the imposition of French culture on the West African culture. However, this policy was only put into practice in parts of Senegal, and we are called the four communes. That is to say, Dakar, Gori, Rufisque, and St. Louis. The term commune, in quotes, was used to describe models of towns and villages in colonies as they were in France. Assimilation was not adopted outside these communes. The communes were relatively self-governing. In fact, in existence, they were elected bodies with mayors, and they oversee the affairs of local and municipal government matters. Features of French colonial administration. Number one, it was a centralized administration. France formed all its 9 colonies into a federation with headquarters at Dakar. At the head of this federation was a governor general. The head of each colony was a governor. The governors were responsible to the governor general, while the governor general was responsible to the minister of colonies in France. Thus, the system was centralized. That is to say, that power flowed from the center to other component units of its administration. Number 2, it was a direct rule. Thus, France ruled the colonies directly. It was believed that France had sufficient men and women ready to take parts in the administration. They expressed their desire to live and work in Africa, unlike the British, who, because of lack of personnel, used the already existing traditional institutions and political systems of the people of Nigeria and other colonies of theirs to govern them. More so, France was always of the opinion that her culture and civilization were the best in the world, and that her mission was to expose this culture and her rich heritage to their colonies. Number 3, West Africans were divided and categorized into citizens and subjects. However, to be a citizen, the following requirements must be met. The individual has to be born in any of the 4 communes. The individual must provide evidence of good and attested behavior from the French colonial government. The individual must have served with the French colonial government for about 10 years. That is to say, that dual citizenship was a feature of French colonial administration. Number 4, education was limited, restricted. Few schools were built by the French authority, and as a result, very few people were educated. So this is also a feature of French colonial administration. Number 5, There was absence of political parties and associations, as formation of these were not encouraged. Number 6, there was no regard for traditional institutions, as they were not recognized. The French leaders appointed chiefs and made them auxiliary officials, and they could be dismissed at will. They were mainly used to collect taxes and to obey orders. Number 7, the French merchants and intellectuals felt that this policy would create equality between them and Africans, and so there was opposition to it. These are some of the features of the French colonial administration. We now go into the reasons for the failure of policy of assimilation. Number 1, assimilation produced first-class and second-class citizens. Some West Africans were made citizens and others remained subjects. This was one of the reasons for the failure of this policy of assimilation. Number 2, France did not regard the culture of the people. Number 3, there was no regard for traditional rulers and chieftaincy institutions. This was one of the failures of the system, as the existing institutions were dismantled and France had to set up the ones that suit its whims and caprices. Number 4, right to full education was only given to those living in any of the 4 communes. Non-citizens have no right to full education. That means the right to education was limited. Number 5, formation of political parties and associations was not allowed or permitted. Number 6, the love the people of West Africa expressed or showed for their culture contributed to the failure of this policy. Number 7, the adoption of the policy of assimilation expected Africans to adopt French culture in whole. These are some of the reasons for the failure of the policy of assimilation. Having looked into this policy of assimilation, we will go into the next policy that the French people used in administering their colonies, which is the policy of association. The policy of association. As a result of intensive oppositions and worldwide condemnation, France therefore decided to abolish the policy of assimilation and embrace the policy of association. This policy of association involves the following factors. 1, respect and recognition of the people's culture. 2, each colony can now develop in the way acceptable to them. 3, the obnoxious indignant policy was abolished. Number 4, the people's traditional political institutions to be restored and the French leaders to use these institutions to administer the people. Number 5, the policy of forced labor, mainly for the subjects or non-citizens, was abolished. Number 6, the abolition of first class and second class citizens. Number 7, freedom of assembly and of forming political associations was permitted. We now look into economic policies and developments in West Africa during the colonial period. Economic policies and developments in West Africa during the colonial period. Number 1, both colonial authorities, that is to say Britain and France, encouraged the people of West Africa to be fully involved in the production of raw materials. Number 2, Africa's full participation in the production of raw materials gave them more money, and with this they were able to buy more of the manufactured products. Number 3, both the French and British economic policies were selfish and mainly fashioned in a way that only the two countries benefited from such policies. It will interest you to know that the construction of the railway was in a bid to enhance the excavation of Africa's raw materials to the hinterlands of the European countries. So it was for selfish economic reasons. Number 4, they mainly promoted the production of cash crops and not food crops. Number 5, research centers were set up mainly to show how to improve the yield of rubber, cocoa, palm produce, etc., and none was done to improve growing and storing of yams, cassava, rice, etc. Number 6, they abolished trade by barter as well as the local currencies. Number 7, there was no plan by any of these powers to establish industries in their West African colonies. France attempted such, but was opposed by French businessmen. So these are some of the economic policies and developments in West Africa during the colonial period. We will now look into the positive impact of colonialism. The positive impacts of colonialism. Number 1, some former colonial territories, especially the French territories, receives military and technical aid from their colonial masters. Thus, military and technical aid is the first positive impact of colonialism. Number 2, trade relations were established with Britain and France. Number 3, it led to development of political parties. Many of these political parties emerged to champion the struggle for political independence. Number 4, colonialism also promoted development of common languages among the colonial territories. English was developed and spoken in British territories, while French developed in French territories. Number 5, it also led to the development of a uniform civil service, which was developed along that of the British and the French systems. Number 6, there was the development of a common legal system among the colonial territories. Number 7, It also led to the emergence of the press, especially the print media, in brackets, newspapers. The press developed and became the mouthpiece of the people in the struggle for political independence. Having seen the positive impacts of colonialism in Africa, we are now going to look into the negative impacts of colonialism. Number one, there was no good means of communication. Hence, the ones that we are constructed, we are not for the benefit of Africans. They were not laid down to facilitate internal trade in African communities. All roads and railways led to the sea. They were built to extract cotton, gold, palm produce, granules, cocoa, etc. All aimed at easing the excavation of raw materials to their own lands. Number two, Africa was being exploited by capital produced by African labor. Example, when Lever Brothers took over the Niger Company in 1929, they became heirs to one of the most notorious exploiters of the 19th century Africa. Number three, colonialism failed to advance Africa along the path of human resources development. Number four, the industries using African raw materials were located outside Africa. Thus, there could be no beneficial backward and forward linkages inside Africa. Number five, colonialism was a negation of freedom. It could not possibly bring modern political liberation to Africans. These and so many others are some of the negative impacts of colonialism in Africa. Having looked into this colonialism, in a bit to wrap it up in our discussion on this colonialism, we will look into the concept of